First of all, to STOA and to Christian Ehler in particular for the invitation to talk to you this afternoon on a topic which indeed has been high on LERU's agenda already for many years. Rachel will use the stick for my slides and show them to you. I hope that they are available for you. And the first slide that I want to show to you is slide number 5, where you see the paper that has been mentioned already by Robert Jan and by Christian Ehler, where we have in 2010 made a thorough analysis of academic freedom as a fundamental right, with several human rights professors of LERU universities. We have made an analysis of what is now the content of academic freedom, because academic freedom is a notion which is very often used, but it's not always very clear what is the content of that notion. And if Rachel goes through to slide number 5, then you will see the front cover of this paper. Immediately we go to slide number 7, I would say, because Robert Jan and Christian already mentioned a number of elements which are on the other slides. But on slide number 7, you see what is in fact the basic premise of the paper that we did in 2010 and which is still very relevant today to sketch the scene on this very important notion of academic freedom. Academic freedom has received legal recognition in several national constitutions and in several international conventions, as well hard law or soft law. And in each of those documents, academic freedom has been presented on the one hand as an individual right, secondly as an institutional right, and finally as a state obligation. And we have seen in all those documents that we have developed from a situation in which academic freedom was mentioned as a kind of implied or implicit right, being part of the freedom of thought and the freedom of speech, as it is the case in the European Convention on Human Rights. And today, however, we have documents in which academic freedom is mentioned explicitly. Already a number of the speakers have referred to Article 13 of the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, and there we see academic freedom mentioned in a very explicit way. Let me dwell a little bit on the 3 dimensions that I just have mentioned, because I only have something like 10 minutes to guide you through this paper. And Rachel will go to slide number 9, where we look at the first dimension of academic freedom, namely academic freedom as an individual right of students, of teachers, and researchers. And here we can make, on the basis of the analysis of constitutions, of conventions, of treaties, and also on the basis of the jurisprudence of the European Court on Human Rights, we can make a distinction between 3 elements of academic freedom as an individual right. There is, first of all, the freedom to study, which is, of course, very relevant for students. Secondly, there is the freedom to teach, very relevant, of course, for teachers. And finally, there is the freedom of research, relevant, of course, for researchers. The freedom to study for students, of course, entails the right to education and the right to develop one's own opinion. The freedom of research, I would say, is, of course, for us, as research-intensive universities in LERU, an absolutely crucial freedom, which includes as well research autonomy, the right to information, the protection of research data and resources, the freedom of publication, and finally, as you see on the next slide, the right to undertake professional activities outside of academic employment. These are in fact the constituent elements for academic freedom as an individual right. But on the other hand, as you see on slide 11, academic freedom is also an institutional right. Many aspects of academic freedom are in fact not merely individual in nature, I would say, but also have a collective or institutional dimension. And that is what we call institutional autonomy. Institutional autonomy is, of course, absolutely crucial for our institutions. autonomy, the possibility to decide on our own how we are going to govern our institution. At the same time, of course, we also have to be accountable for what we do as an institution. And so, of course, this autonomy brings all kinds of obligations and commitments for institutions. Institutional autonomy is also, of course, directly linked with self-governance and participation by student and staff in the decision-making process of our institutions. And a third element of academic freedom as an institutional right, I would say, is the fact that universities, their departments and their faculties have this obligation and this commitment to promote, to stimulate in a substantive way the right to study by their students, the freedom to teach by their teachers, and the freedom of research and publication by their researchers. So in fact, institutional autonomy is the necessary backup for individual academic freedom. It is the guarantee of institutional autonomy which is a sine qua non for the individual rights of academics to study, to teach, to research, and to publish. On slide 12, and I see that Rachel is already a bit further, on slide 12, you will see the third dimension of academic freedom, namely academic freedom as a state obligation. State obligation to protect and to respect academic freedom and to ensure and to promote academic freedom. In fact, academic freedom as a state obligation is key for academic freedom to exist in any meaningful sense of the word. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, that if we look at the three dimensions of academic freedom, we see that it encompasses a lot of elements, that it includes a very significant protection of all those elements of academic freedom, but that still, as Robert Jan and Christian already indicated, that we still see many attacks on academic freedom. And that's why, as you see on slide 13, we need new directions for research and action regarding academic freedom. It already has been mentioned. It should be a stronger part of human rights, of the human rights framework, for example, through the Scholars at Risk network, which promote academic freedom, also through the Academic Freedom Index. Much more action is possible, as you see on slide 14. Also, all kinds of tools can be designed for policy and action on academic freedom. But my most important point this afternoon is, as you see on slide 15, is that in my opinion, we need to develop a new legal basis for legal action to protect academic freedom. Because notwithstanding everything that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the conventions, the constitutions, the vast jurisprudence of the European Court on Human Rights, we still see that taking speedy legal action to counteract specific forms of infringements, of attacks on academic freedom is still very difficult today. And you see on slide 15, indeed, which you have in front of you, a summary of the decision of the Court of Justice of the 6th of October 2020 in the case of the Commission versus Hungary. It's of course the case on the Central European University, where in fact the European Court of Justice had to go and look for arguments in the GATS agreement, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, in order to make sure that it was clearly to be stated that Hungary had failed to comply with the respect of academic freedom in its universities, in particular in the Central European University. So the Court of Justice had to go to the GATS agreement to find a decent legal basis to get to a conviction of the member state Hungary. Next to the GATS agreement, they also referred, of course, to Article 13 of the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights and to the free movement of services, the freedom to conduct a business, and the freedom to found higher education institutions. A lot of them are to be found back, as you see on slide 16, in the articles 13, 14, and 16 of the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, where we have an explicit mentioning of the freedom of the arts and sciences, the right to education, and the freedom to conduct a business. So a worrying development, namely that the Court of Justice has to go that far to the GATS agreement to find a legal basis to condemn the member state Hungary. And on the next two slides, slide 17 to start with, you will see that my worry with regard to finding a legal basis to tackle issues of academic freedom in the European Union, my worry is in fact even increased by a recent answer by Commissioner Gabriel to a question posed by Christian Ehler himself on academic freedom. And you see on slide 18 that in fact the Commission is reducing academic freedom to an element, to a part of the member state educational policy and legislation. Questioned by Mr. Ehler if the European treaties foresee enough tools to tackle issues of academic freedom in the 27 member states. In fact, the Commission refers to the fact that the field of education, of which academic freedom is a part, is in fact not an area where the European Union has a lot of competences and as a consequence cannot act on those issues in a very thorough and decisive way. This answer to Mr. Ehler was very much in line with an earlier answer that the Commissioner gave in 2020 when she was asked about possible action vis-à-vis measures taken towards the Confucius Institutes in the European Union. So these developments, as well in the jurisprudence of the Court of Justice, as well the answers that we see to parliamentary questions on the issue of academic freedom, lead me to the conclusions that you see on page 19 of my slides. The conclusion, namely, that we need an additional EU legal basis for legal action to fight attacks on academic freedom. Academic freedom is, as we said, a core aspect of every academic activity, which has several dimensions in the field of research, education, teaching, publications, and things like that. So it means that we must be able to tackle much better than we can do now all kinds of attacks, all kinds of pressures on academic freedom. And a solution for that, I think, is certainly if you now look at the convention which is going on to review possibly the treaties that are governing the EU up until now, well, that's perhaps a good occasion to see if we can also include an EU legal basis in the treaties to tackle all kinds of attacks on academic freedom. So Robert Jan, just in a nutshell, what I wanted to mention on this legal framework on academic freedom.